Hello, and we are here for another episode of Rugby Through the Leagues podcast. As this episode was pre-planned for a little while, we've managed to finally get Simon Middleton on, ex-England women's manager, a legend within the game, and it's been an absolute honour to finally get him on. I managed to message him pretty much a good 6 months or so ago, and then we've finally managed to get it on. So, Simon, thank you for joining us. For those that aren't aware who you are, can we get a bit of a run through of your rugby career and where you've been, what you've done, and
Yeah, how
where
long
we
we
are?
got? Uh,
Yeah,
First of all, thanks for having me on. Always great to chat about rugby. Love,
yeah,
we love chatting rugby. So I'm a bit of a cross coder. Started out in rugby union, just playing junior level. Then I went and played at Castleford Rugby League. I had about 6 years, 7 years at Castleford. Played quite a bit of Super League, so that's probably where I played my standard of rugby. And then through my love of rugby union, I went back there towards the back end of my career. I had a couple of seasons, a little bit of time with Otley, who are a beautiful club
yeah,
up in Yorkshire, and then I went to Leeds. I had about 18 months finishing my career at Leeds, and under Phil Davis, joined the coaching staff at Leeds, a skills coach, then defence coach, and I spent 12, 13 years at Leeds, playing it and coaching. Before I actually went for their coach's job after, because I'd been assistant coach and I'd done most things, and then finally under Neil Back and whatnot, I'd become more of an assistant covering most things, and I thought, right, I'm probably ready for head coaching, and anyway, Neil left. I went for the head coach role, didn't get it, and I ended up out of work for the first time ever, because all through my playing and coaching career, right up to around sort of when Stu Lancaster was head coach, I had a full time job as well, so I was quite busy, and then I
yeah,
was very much not busy, and I didn't have any work, and I had two very young kids, and a wife and a mortgage, and I went to work at college, a director of rugby at a college in Hull, and I had 2 years there working with young people between 16 and generally between 16 and 21, and it was the hardest job I've ever had for lots of reasons, but it was almost the best job I ever had as well. It was like
yeah. I
the
can
stuff I
imagine.
learned. Anyway, 2 years into that, I'd done some guest coaching with England under Gary Street, a really good friend of mine, and I got a phone call to see if I wanted to join England, primarily, primarily with the 15s, but it was starting out as sevens head coach,
Yeah,
and I got into the sevens coaching role with England into 2014, and that sort of led me into the World Cup 2014 as a 15s coach, assistant coach with Gary and Graham Smith at the time, and that went really well for us. And then the year after I became head coach, and I was head coach till 2022, 2023.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was in a nutshell. That's been my playing and coaching career.
So obviously you dabbled in the GB sevens as well. So
I
what?
did.
How did that sort of fall? Did nobody else put their hand up, or did you kind of think, actually, I fancy having a go? Or
So I think I were in the driving seat simply because England were a full time program on the World Series, and England were
yeah,
were chosen to qualify GB. Uh, so once the World Cup, the 15s World Cup was over, I went back into the sevens, did the World Series, and then the Rio Olympics was obviously being the sevens had just been accepted in there, and the men's and women's sort of interviews were done, and I applied off the back of working with England, and and I got the role, and that's how I ended up in Rio.
yeah, pretty amazing place to probably go and plough your track. How did you manage to, obviously, when you got that role there as the head coach, how did you sort of transition between sevens and 15s? Because I've spoke to a couple of coaches that have sort of been pocketed as sevens
Yeah,
specialists, and then
yeah.
that you did you worry that you might be sort of categorised as that, or did you manage to separate it, or do you think because you had your league background you were able to sort of stand out from that, or
Yeah, to be honest, I certainly didn't class myself as a sevens coach. Like literally, when I
yeah,
got the job with England, I bought a book how to play sevens, And I kid you not, I did, because I'd only coached like the sevens team at the college in Pocklington Sevens, which we won. It was a great win for us. We'd never won it before. We had the bragging rights to East Yorkshire, which meant an awful lot for the college, so I was well in favour.
Brilliant.
But I literally got the job, and I did enjoy coaching sevens when I dabbled with it at the college. But then I was like, right, this is going to be a different ball game altogether in terms of the level you're operating at, and it certainly was. I was straight in. Like I finished the college, the job at the college, and my first gig was a double header. We flew to Atlanta, and then we flew to Sao Paulo for a double header, and I had to do quite a bit of research and quite a bit of into what sevens looks like these days. And I did. I bought a book, and it was written by Mike Friday, Simon Amor, Ben Ryan, all those experts. They'd all chipped in.
Yeah.
And I thought, it can't be that hard, can it? And I looked, and it didn't seem it, but then I thought, well, what you've got to do, you've got to apply what you know, and so I sort of looked at how England had been playing, and I thought, yeah, okay, I can see some inroads here. I can see how we can make a difference, and I put my own slant on it, which I'm not quite sure was a traditional sevens edge to edge. I remember Alice Richardson, who was a brilliant sevens player, once said to me, I don't know why we don't just bother training in a squash court, which tickled me. but we use short sides a lot, that type of thing. But anyway, so I always classed myself as a 15s coach, but I really enjoyed my sevens. So the transition bit was okay, and what I did do as well was when I got the England job, I could recruit my own staff, and I recruited Matt Ferguson in to do the forwards and Scott Beeman in to do the backs. And Scotty took the lead coach role on when I wasn't there. So although I dipped in and out of the programs, I was very much sevens focused all the way through to the end of Rio, and I would just go in and support the program from an observational point of view, and and we would, as a coaching group, we would kick ideas off. But I was really keen to let Scotty lead it with Matt in there. They were fantastic coaches, and we had a good staff as well, and so I didn't have to. There wasn't a massive amount of switching between sevens and 15s. There was one year where it did get pretty tricky, a bit busy. But off the back of that, I thought we sort of realised then as well, we need two roles.
Yeah, fair enough. At least, and that's the best way of sort of in a management or sort of coaching role is to bring in people that are better than you. So it makes your role easier.
100%. For me, it's probably when people talk about legacy and things like that. For me, the quality of staff that we brought together and we built the program around is the legacy, because you are a product of what you put in. The old, crap in, crap out type thing is true. You put really good people around good players, and you'll get a good outcome, and that's been very much my philosophy on sort of leadership and management. Is very much about getting the right people in the room, and that's what we did with England, and we never really looked back.
Right. So obviously the women's game as well. How did you sort of come across into that? Was that because of your involvement in the sevens and they sort of scouted that across, or was it that you felt that you could make a more of an impact in there?
No, it was purely through my relationship with Gary Street. So when I was at Leeds, like we were in the Prem, so I was coaching in the men's Premiership with Leeds, which was fantastic. But I was doing my level 4 coaching badges, and I was on the same course as Gary, and Gary was obviously a head coach of the women at the time, and he was like, look, we're always trying to bring guest coaches in, and how do you fancy coming and doing some defence? I was defence coach at Leeds at the time, and I was like, 100%, mate. You never turn down an opportunity to coach your country. The coaching the women piece, I never really overthought that. I just coached.
It was just rugby.
Rugby.
It's rugby.
Yeah. And that was it. And I went and I did some guest coaching, and I did a bit more. It was in the build up to the 2010 World Cup, and I sort of become defence consultant through to that tournament, and then after that, we stayed close, and I came in and did more coaching with him. And while I was at the college, I got a call from Nicky Ponsford saying, "Look, we're going to play the Euros in Italy. Gary's not going to go. Graham's going to lead. You fancy going as assistant coach?" And I had a chat with the principal of the college, a lady called Jeanette Dawson, who was a massive rugby union fan, Leicester Tigers fan. Brilliant. Through and through. And she was like, "Yeah, you got to go." And I went, and we had a really successful Euro, so that embedded me even more into the program. And then, when the scenario unrolled with regards to the sevens and the 14s, the 2014 World Cup, that's how it rolled into it. But I never thought I'm going to go in there and try to be a champion of the women's game or anything. I just wanted to coach. I wanted to coach my country. I saw great players and great potential when I went in, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. So I generally chase things that inspire me, and that inspired me working with the players at that point, and obviously playing for your country or coaching your country. Well, but it's like playing for your country. If that doesn't inspire you, nothing does.
Exactly.
But a lot of things, being in the right place at the right time. There's an awful lot of luck involved in working your way through almost a career. It's what you do with those breaks. That's the key bit. But I've been very lucky. I've had a couple of big moments in my career from a playing and a coaching point of view, being in the right place at the right time, and if you don't take them, then you've nobody to blame yourself.
Exactly that. That leads us on to as I said to you earlier, we put a little bit out on our social media to try and see anyone that wanted to try and pick your brains. And Sam X3 on TikTok actually put quite a poignant question for where we're at in the conversation. What advice would you give to someone wanting to be a pro rugby coach but is only in their early 20s?
I think if you have a passion for it and a desire for it, it doesn't matter what you do. And I talked to quite a few coaches who are young because because they've not played, or B, because they've played and they've had to retire. And at the end of the day, I think people look at it at times and think it's almost like a negative being young and coaching. It's not. You've got to turn every situation into a positive. So the energy that young people bring, the association they bring, and particularly with Gen Z these days, who think very differently from when I first started coaching. So the connection that you have with those young people can be massively important. But at the end of the day, the principles remain the same. You need a passion for it. You need a philosophy. You need good relationship skills for sure these days, good communication skills. But if you've a passion for it, and above all, you've got to work hard. If you want to make it to the top, you have got to be prepared to work so hard, because it is a great job to be in. Playing and coaching is a great job to be in. Any job is that you love doing. But if you're going to be successful at it, you're probably going to work a lot of hours, and a lot of unreasonable hours, and you're going to have to make some really tough choices. And I pick my words carefully there, because I don't say sacrifices, because they're not, because you're in a very privileged position. There's a lot of sacrifices made by people who support you, but you have to make tough choices about where you're going to be at certain times. So if you're prepared to work hard, you're prepared to make tough choices, you learn your craft, you stay open-minded. The pretty much basic principles of being successful in any business.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, if you find a job that you love, you'd never work a day in your life, effectively.
Exactly.
And as you said, just because somebody puts a label thinking they're early 20s, they're as long as a lot of people understand they're not going to walk straight into a head coach's role, and you kind of got to do the hard yards to find and pick up your knowledge from other people. Like as
Absolutely.
you said, you gained your experience through sort of entering in as an assistant coach, as a defence coach. You're not going to walk straight into the top job, but you've got to do the dirty bits to understand how to do that top role. You're not
100%.
If it's handed to you, you're not going to appreciate the graft that you have to put in to get there.
And to be honest, if it gets handed to you, you're probably not going to stay there very long unless you are incredibly good at what you do. Because again, I've had a lot of luck in the way things have rolled out for me. So through playing at Leeds in a team and in a sport that was just starting to really feel its way in rugby union, in professionalism. Rugby union had put a big emphasis on rugby league expertise when it shifted professional. Defence coaches, players, etc., etc. It was a complete flip of what had been happening previously. And I was, again, probably right time, right place. And I got asked by Phil. He was like, "Listen, mate, I'm not going to give you another playing contract, but do you want to stay on and do some coaching?" And for me, it suited me at the time because, as I say, I had a full-time job, so I didn't depend on it. You know, it was a minimal amount of cash, which wasn't really important, but it kept me in the environment because I didn't want to play anymore. I categorically did not want to play anymore when I finished. Completely played out. I thought I'll really miss the environment. And like we'd just been promoted into the Premiership, so I literally went straight into coaching in the Premiership, just a skills coach. But I was working with good players, and I was working with a group of players I knew, so it wasn't particularly daunting for me. We got to the end of that season. We did a review. We finished bottom, but didn't get relegated because Rotherham couldn't come up because they didn't fulfil the criteria. So we got another lucky break. And Phil was like, "What do you think we need?" And I was like, "We need a defence coach because we're scoring points, but we can't stop conceding." And he's like, "What do you think?" And one of my best friends is Mike Ford, because I played at Castleford with him. Mike had been defence coach at Ireland, etc., or became defence coach at Ireland after a little bit later, but he was just breaking in. Anyway, Phil was like, "Tell you what, how do you fancy doing it?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, I'll give it a crack." And we had a really good season. So I entered at a really high level, but as the years rolled out, it became very apparent to me what I didn't know. And I remember being put in charge of the A team when Neil Back and Andy Key were at Leeds, and Andy was like, Andy was great for development, and he was like, "Listen, mate, you take this on, you run the A team, so it's like a bit of an introduction to head coaching."
Yeah.
And I was so far out of my depth, even though I'd coached 10 years defence in the Premiership, well, in and out of the Premiership, I was so far out of my depth because I just did not have an attacking philosophy. I did not, and I was trying to mimic what Andy was doing, and I was like, and I was so uncomfortable with it. So I took a job on coaching my local team, and then when it didn't work out at Leeds, I went to the college and I coached there. And between coaching Pontefract Rugby Union Club, which is where I live, and coaching the college side, I actually learned about attacking rugby and head coaching. So I learned it at grassroots level. I didn't learn it at the top, how to become an head coach.
No, that's that, and I think that epitomises grassroots rugby as well. That a lot of people are able to transition between the two. You could have a job at a top level when there is obviously that demand, but there's so many grassroots rugby clubs that are willing to take on people just to help develop them and develop the club.
Yeah,
and there's enough players within the game that have been around long enough that can help you strengthen your skills. It's not just going in and doing what you know. You can also learn off other people, and I think that's probably the best option to feed back to Sam, is just try and absorb and get yourself in the right places wherever you can go and learn from someone that's
absolutely
had that experience.
Yeah, just keep getting yourself in there, keep learning, keep taking opportunities to learn, keep experimenting with different environments, different groups, different ages.
And I think that also. So I've just come to the end of coaching the under-16s in Spain. So I coach S16s. I've done it for the last sort of year or so, and I understand what you say when you try and talk. There's a different way of approaching the younger generation. Like I'm nearly 35 now, and I'm still I'm stuck in that middle bit because I kind of grew up with the older generation. I started working when I was sort of 18, went straight into that life. So I got a different sort of value set, and then I'm trying to watch how these kids have got to navigate around it while they've also got parents that are in the similar bracket to that I'm, and it's like I don't envy their position. Like I don't envy having to be in between the two ways. And then I've got my boys are 7 and 5 as well, and then you've got a whole different generation there again. And you, as long as you try and it's not even just try and blend in. It's not trying to be like a chameleon because you can't change who you are, but you've got to understand how they react to different different ways of doing
Completely.
things.
Completely. So mine are 24 and 20. So I've
Yeah,
had plenty of good lessons from them as I've gone along. But
yeah,
what became very obvious to me, because when I class myself as a traditional coach, probably at one point, and there were specific ways of how I would coach the side, and I think I've always been, I've always been good at communicating with the players. Probably not as frequent as I should have, but I do try to understand. This is where I learned so much at the college, and probably through actually not dealing with them as well as I should have done at the college. And but it became very apparent to me that when I came in 2014, the average age of the squad was about 29, and I thought one of the things we have to do is get the age of the squad down.
yeah,
That was a squad that had been together a long time. When we got to 2017 World Cup, I think the average age was about 24, 25. And obviously, I'm another 3 years older. And it was quite obvious to me that this trend will just carry on. I'm going to keep getting older. The group's going to keep getting younger. Like, you've got to get into their world. Because
yeah,
you can't, you're going to ask them to come into your world for certain things, about how you play, about certain non-negotiables, but you have to understand what's important to them. I don't do social media. I never have, but I understand how important it is for them, and I
yeah,
understand how important it is in the new world, as we call it now.
yeah,
So it's like I certainly don't disrespect it. It's got a huge place in their lives and in sport and
yeah,
and just the world. So
yeah.
you've got to move into their world, which is why I say, if you're a young person who's learning the trade coaching wise, you've actually got a head start.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure, not a lot of pressure, there's a lot of noise around the social media usage within the Red Roses at the minute. A lot of the women's rugby having to create their own brand, which I'm massively on board with. I think it's brilliant that they were able to create a persona and a character around how they are and sort of connect with the fans, because the men's rugby is a completely different kettle of fish. It's
Yeah,
more tailored towards a team sport. You see more of a tailored social media aspect for a team rather than individuals. But I think that's potentially the catalyst of where men's rugby is not moving forward, because players aren't allowed to create their own brand,
yeah.
whereas women's rugby's able to step out from that and create they do all the TikTok dances and stuff. I can't dance, so that's why I don't do them.
No, I
So,
can't either.
but uh, what John Mitchell's doing as well at the minute within the Red Roses, he's also fully embraced it really well, isn't he? He gets dragged into it, and he looks really awkward with it, but he embraces it. So you obviously sort of left a couple of years ago and handed the baton across. Did you ever feel that you sort of could delve into it, or did you just sort of say, I understand it, but that's just not me, and I'd look really, really awkward if I'd started trying to get involved in it?
Yeah, no, stupid would be the word. It's yeah, it's such a great point, because I could sort of see the way the game was going. The women's game is so different from the men's game. The audience
Yeah,
is totally different. Match day is a totally different experience, and and as I say, I think it's a great topic you've brought up here, because it's something that I think about an awful lot. And like, is the women's game a performance sport first and foremost? It's a performance sport first and foremost. Is it a performance sport? I would argue it's maybe not now, in terms of the most important thing that drives the audiences, that
yeah,
drives the energy in it. It's almost like an experience. They want it to be a real experience about connections, expressing themselves. And don't get me wrong, like, you watch England play in particular over the last 4 games in the Six Nations. They're
yeah,
devastating. They're so good. Like, I'm not saying that the players are not talented and they're not performance focused. I know they are, but I'm
yeah,
talking about the game as a whole now. Which is the direction it's taking? I think the men's game is still about being European champions, being Premiership champions, I think the women's game is very much about how do we express ourselves, what does entertainment look like for us, and it's probably just more all encompassing. And you watch how much they enjoy the environment and enjoy being with each other. And you talk about, do I connect with social media and things like that? So Six Nations 2 weeks ago, there was the sort of scenario where at the end of the game against Wales, Sarah Byrne comes over to brings Jazz Joyce with her, and we're there. So my reaction is, Burner, I'll hold the camera. I am not getting in on this. There is not a cat in hell's chance. And just to come back to what you said about, would you do what John Mitchell's doing? I haven't seen any of the stuff he's done. Good on him? No, absolutely categorical. I support it, and I will not be involved in it. But Jazz gets hammered off the back of that by people But I know Jazz. She was in the GB. She's a triple Olympian. She is an outstanding sports person and an outstanding person, and she a great athlete, works so hard. She's just embracing what the culture is now around the women's game, and people need to understand and differentiate. You're not looking at the men's game when you're looking at the women's game. You're looking at a totally different sport in terms of what the audience is, what the audience wants, and what the player, the skill, because it's a skill. Entertaining is a skill, and the girls are like that. It's part of their craft now. And they're owning it. So
I think it's more of a family women's rugby, because obviously they play they're together so much as they're in the PWR. Obviously the PWR then rolls straight into the Six Nations, and then the Six Nations ends, and then we've got that period before what is probably going to be the biggest World Cup in women's sport. Like that is probably this is the pinnacle where it is so far. It's on that step, and then it's going to go on again. It's you're managing to bring players across from the sevens and from the other parts to go and play in this World Cup, that just to be able to try and push it. So you obviously got Lona Mayers come across, played in Bristol, and brought another aspect of social media to these players. And it is a family. They are a family. They know each other inside out from playing together. And then when they get on the pitch and they leave that bit there, once they've done that, they're all back together as mates. And I don't see the noise. I don't see why the noise needs to be there. As you said, it's a completely separate brand. It's a completely separate game in that sense. And women's rugby's on a different path to men's rugby. And it becomes it's a bit more NFL like, isn't it? Because you literally want to encompass everyone. Everyone does a fan day. They do everything. Everyone is together, whether you're wearing an England shirt, Wales shirt. There's always going to be that rivalry. But in the women's game, it's not as sort of hostile. Not the rugby, but
no, I think you're right. You're completely right. It's not. It's a real party atmosphere. It doesn't. The fans, the Wales, Scotland, Ireland, they've copped a bit of a beating from England over there. The fans staying there. The fans still want to see their players at the end. They still want to have selfies. They still want to have autographs. They still want to pat them on the back and tell them how great they are. And you got to. How can you not embrace that? Because these players are under massive pressure. They're under massive pressure. They train hard. They're trying to make a living out of what they're doing. And if they can't make a living out of there, they're working, and then they're training, and then they're playing. They're playing for their countries. There's a lot of expectation, a lot of pressure on them. So, I think at the very least, what we have to do is embrace what they're trying to do with their sport. Because certainly in terms of connecting with their audience, it's working. And they've got to keep trying, because we constantly talk about how we're going to grow the game, how do we keep the game moving forward, and nobody has a better feel for it than the generation that are playing it.
I agree. I think leave women's rugby to grow how women's rugby is. It's a completely different performance sport to men's. There's a whole completely different audience as well. There's some of the old guard of the men's rugby that aren't interested in women's rugby. There's no point of beating around the bush. Some just that's that's brilliant, but that's not for me, and that's fine. Because you can't please everyone in everything, because otherwise it would be boring life if everyone was watching the same thing.
But it's,
But let them grow that, and
yeah,
then men's rugby will grow in its own manner.
yeah.
But the problem is, men's rugby may run the risk of being overtaken by women's rugby if it doesn't take certain changes.
Well, if if you don't learn from what's evolving around you and evolving successfully around you, then there's something wrong, isn't there? But I agree with you. There's if people want to follow the men's model and only the men's model, and that's absolutely fine. I totally understand that, because I'm still a performance coach. At heart, I am a performer. I want to see a great game. I want to see great players doing great things. Do I enjoy everything that comes off the back of the women's game at the end? Yeah, absolutely. Watching, I've been fortunate enough to do the BBC coverage, so I've been pitch side at the end, and you like the atmosphere in the ground, like an hour after the game's finished, half an hour, there's still thousands of fans in there, and it's almost like, for so many of the fans, the end part is the best part of the experience, because they know they're going to get to see their fans, their heroes. They know that if they hang around, they're going to get autographs, they're going to get pictures, they're going to get Bernard doing TikTok videos. They're just going to get great engagement, And I watched the reaction of my daughter when stuff like that's going on, and it says everything. She's loving watching them, and I totally understand it.
I think that also helps as well, because a lot of the women's game you've sort of created that cult following within your own club. Whereas men's rugby, you're not always allegiance to one club. You just love rugby, and you obviously you get allegiance to your national side. But then club rugby so sparsely spread across in the Premiership. It's like I originally from Portsmouth, so closest one is Quins, and I only sort of follow Quins because that was my first rugby game I went to, because of when I went with mates and stuff. But there's a lot of people around the country that have going to be growing up without a rugby club in that region, or can't reach it. So obviously Worcester coming back obviously is a big positive to that area as well. And then you've got obviously Wasps disappear wherever they come back. London Irish again is probably another close. It's so widely spread within the men's game, whereas the women's game sort of it's a bit of a wider net within the club rugby, so it's able to absorb a few more fans. And then they play for Scotland. Well, they also play for my club, so when I go to that game, I want to still talk to them, whether it was England or Scotland. Like, do you know what I mean? I think that's what helps that game grow within that, because you create the cult following within your club, and then it doesn't concern the fans as much whether they're English, Scottish, Welsh, South African. They're part of their club.
They still connect to them. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a brilliant way for them to be able to grow that game continually as well. Buster, one of the other lads that's part of the pod, he dropped a message as well, and he goes, you might not want to hang your hat on this yet, but who is the most naturally gifted player that you ever got the chance to work with? He highlighted female, but obviously there's whether we do both, or whether you're not willing to hang your hat on one person at all. Or
I would. So from a female point of view, there's probably two: Meg Jones and Ellie Kildon. And I was fortunate to have been involved in their introduction into the England setup, certainly into the seniors. I went to watch Meg when she was 16, and I actually stumbled across Ellie when my daughter was playing in the final for Castleford.
Oh, really?
And and Ellie was playing for West Park, and there were 50. It was the under-15s Yorkshire Cup final. And I went and I'm stood pitch side, and Castleford got a really good side at this point, and they're giving it to West Park, and there's one kid who is making breaks, scoring tries, making great options with the ball, and has an unbelievable kicking game, both out of hand and off the tee. She's kicking goals from the touchline, and I'm like, I'm not sure I've ever seen anything like this since watching Meg Jones. So there was an RDO there, development officer, and I just went, who's the girl playing 13? He said, her name's Ellie Kildon. I put a name into my phone, and then when I got back on the under-20s, they're the under-18s coach, and I was like, Ellie Kildun, do you know? Yeah, she's in the pathway. She's under 15. I'm like, mate, I want her into the senior camp as soon as possible. And so women's game, Ellie and Meg, absolute standouts, natural players, so good. Well, you're asking me to look back now. I like Jonathan Davis was unbelievable as a player because he was not just a rugby union superstar. He was a rugby league superstar as well, and he had a great art. There wasn't much he couldn't do. So he was one that jumps out at me as being, someone who could do everything. There were so many good players around that. I mean, like your Jason Robinsons, your Martin Fires, but they had specific traits. But as an all-round great rugby player, Jonathan Davis was brilliant.
So I'm going to throw an extra curveball on that then. Who's the most naturally gifted coach you've ever come across? Apart from yourself, obviously.
Darryl Powell.
Really?
Yeah.
Just was able to just bring everyone together, do everything that was...
He came out of rugby league, so he brought the golden generation through at Leeds. So Rob Burrow, bless him, Kev Sinfield, Danny Maguire, all that generation that came through Daz's academy at Leeds.
Yeah.
And things didn't, for whatever reason, things didn't work out for him at Leeds, and he had an option to leave or an option to come in to do some work with Rugby Union with us. And Phil, Phil was always a visionary, and he was like, come in and work with us, Daz. And Pauli came in, and within I'd never played Rugby Union, and within a year, he'd sort of taken on the head coaching role, and we absolutely belted Cardiff 49-0, I think it was. We were a good side at the time in the Heineken Cup post stages, and it was purely off the back of the work Daz had done. And then he left and he went to Featherstone Rovers, and he turned. They were a championship side, but like they won the championship like 4 or 5 times. And then he went to Castleford, who are very dear to my heart. Really been struggling for a lot of years. Got him to the grand final, got him to Wembley, won the minor premier. The one place it didn't work out for him was obviously Warrington. Now he's at Wakefield doing the sort of stuff that he did at Cass, and watching him work, the detail that he worked with on the basis, but also his relationship with players, I think it's because he could see the game so clearly, just understands rugby. So he could watch a game and then he could sit down and probably go through the game with every player and give them an account of their game and how he saw it and get the best out. And players who've worked under him absolutely love him because he's got such a great relationship, or certainly, certainly the ones I knew. So I was fortunate enough I played against him when he was at Sheffield and Leeds when I was at Cass, and then I was fortunate enough to work with him for a couple of years at Leeds, and it was a real education.
Wow. So yeah, he sounds like he's done a number on a few people's careers. Obviously, we keep dabbling in between the two codes here. So obviously, the league and union. Adam's one of the other hosts on Rugby Through the Leagues. He's actually asked, what was the driving force between you changing from league to union? Was it because you loved union but were better at playing league, or was it how did that sort of come across?
So again, like. I've never had a career path. I've never thought I'm going to do this. This is my goal. This is where I want to get to next. I've always had an inner belief that something was going to happen. I was going to do something a bit different from what I've been doing. But like everybody, left school at 16, went straight into a factory, worked in a factory. I played at Nottingley, my local club. I was absolutely terrible at school playing rugby. I had nothing about me at all. I had a big ginger perm, and I was pale, and I weighed 9 stone, and they were like, "Oh, sir, has Middleton got to be on our side?" Yeah, I'll put him on the wing. Okay, put him on the wing. I had no pace about me or anything. I had nothing going for me as a rugby player, and it was a really bad experience at school for me playing wise. But then I went to watch my brother play at Nottingley when I'd left school, and it was just the atmosphere around the club.
Yeah,
it was just gripped me. and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I went back in. Some of my mates from school, my better mates, were playing there, and I joined the academy, or the Colt side as it was there. And the first trip we had to go to Bridlington, and then on the way back, we stopped at a pub, and the coach who was there was like, "Come on, lads, here we go, we'll have a pint." And I was 17 years old. I'm thinking, this is unbelievable. Like, I'm like in a pub at 17, having a beer with my mates. This is life.
Yeah.
And I stayed at Nottingham. By the time I was 18, I was first team captain. Because
Wow.
I just what I actually discovered, I had unbelievable pace. Even though I was there so myself, it's the only thing I had. But I had where it came from, I have no idea. But I had
Yeah.
pace, and I had unbelievable desire to be the best I could be. So I'm like, I will be the best trainer in this
Yeah.
club.
Brilliant.
And everywhere I've gone, I was like, I will be the best trainer. I love training in the gym. I love training on the field, because I knew without that, I was just another player.
Yeah.
And I played at Nottingham till I was around 24, and there was lots. It was really like 7, 8 divisions below. It was just social rugby. But I
Yeah.
was going all right, and there was a lot of noise about, "Oh, you're going to go to one of the bigger clubs." So at the time, Wakefield were a big club, Sandal were a big club, your local teams for us like that. And there was a guy called Dave Scully who was a scrum half for Wakefield, and Castleford Rugby League had been chasing him for a long time, but he was a fireman, so he loved his fireman career and whatnot. And there was an invitational game where Castleford Rugby Union, who were just a junior side, had put some
Right.
floodlights up, and they wanted to open these floodlights up with a game. Yorkshire had got to the final of a championship final, so they needed a warm-up game. So basically, they set this game up at Castleford, with Yorkshire versus an invitational side. So they brought in the guy who was in charge, put 4 or 5 of the Castleford players in, but then brought in a load of ringers who weren't playing for Yorkshire anymore because they needed a good hit out. And he just phoned
Yeah.
me, he said, "Do you fancy having a run out at fullback?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I'm
Go on
playing
then.
with a couple of Yorkshire lads who I've been watching for years. Dave Scully was one of them, scrum half. Brian Barley was a fantastic player, runs for England. And the Castleford coaching staff came along to watch Dave Scully, and I had the best game you could ever have in your life.
Really?
Like, and a week later, I got a phone call, and it was a Wednesday night. I remember it's like, "Oh, hi, mate, Daryl Vandervelde here from Castleford," and I'm like thinking, "Oh shit, this is one of the lads winding me up."
Somebody's having you what?
Somebody
Yeah.
had me on, and I had this conversation. He's like, "Hey, came and watched you last week. Da 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 da. Fancy coming down and having some trials with us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd absolutely love to." He said, "Right, tomorrow night at Castleford, 7 o'clock we're training." And I got off the phone. Unfortunately, I knew Graham Stedman, who was with Castleford, really well. Graham was a bit of a superstar player at the time, a
Yeah.
local lad. And I phoned him up. I'm like, "Listen, Steady, I've just had it." He said, "Yeah, mate, it's Darrell's really impressed with you." I'm like, and I went down, and that's the break. That's the lucky break
Wow.
you get, and then you just make the most of it. And I
Yeah.
stayed at Cast there, as I say, for 6, 7 years. But I always had I had a yearning to go back to rugby union because I loved it so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was coming to the end of my career, my league career, and I thought, "Well, what am I going to do next?" And yeah, I'd been injured for about 6 months one season, and I got fit just as the season finished. And I just said to the coach, was called John, the lad in charge, John Joyner at the time, and I just, can I go play some rugby union rather than do a pre-season again? And
Yeah.
I think at that time they were trying to offload me, and he was like, "Yeah, mate, of course you can. Get yourself
See you
off."
later.
And I went to Otley Rugby Union Club, and it was like winding the clock back.
Yeah.
Brilliant club, clubhouse packed, everybody having a big beer after the game. I just loved it again. The rugby union part of it, loved it. And then one of the teams I played against was Leeds, and Phil Davis phoned me up, and he's like, "Mate, are you finishing with rugby league? We'd be interested in having you here." And I actually went back, played another year at Cass. Actually played all right, to be honest, last year. And then I went to Leeds, and that's how it all happened. And
Yeah.
like, it's just a great game. Rugby's just a great game, and I loved league because it was so tough, and
Yeah.
it was such a challenge. And I loved union because it was just brilliant to play. Yeah, long story long. Sorry.
No, no, not at all. No, because what I get the sense from you, you just love rugby. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
what code it is. It's just you just want to be part of rugby, and I think a lot of us are. Like obviously, being down south, I don't quite understand the league side of it. I
Mm.
don't get it, but obviously there's a lot of top coaches now that have transitioned between the two. So
Mm.
they've obviously been part of league and part of union.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Massive.
the like the Farrells and
Yeah.
obviously Fordy and stuff like that. What do you think makes them stand out from the rest of potentially those union specialists? What makes what? Because like Kev Sinfield's come in and worked wonders for the England men's as well and stuff like that. And there's a lot of coaches that are leaning on ex-league players.
Yeah.
What what do you think adds that element to make them so good within the union game?
I think, and I say this with the very greatest of respects because rugby's like anything in life. It needs a bit of everything.
Mm,
Those players you just talked about there, they're tough. They're tough
mm,
players. They're from the north. They're from a game that you had to fight every inch for, and you had to understand. So their knowledge of rugby, of skill, and of what it takes to play right at the top, because although, like for instance, GB Rugby League never had the profile of England Rugby Union,
mm.
the level back in the 90s, the level of rugby league player was so far in advance of rugby union's best players,
Yeah,
because they've been professional for 10, 15 years, but also because of the nature of the people who played it. But if you think back to where Wigan put a side into the Middlesex Sevens, never played rugby union before, off the back of a week's training they win it. It's because they're great athletes and they're
yeah,
tough and they've got great skill set and they've got real adaptability. They could think rugby and see
mm,
rugby, and I think that's been what the secret of success for people like Fordy and for like Faz and for Sean Edwards. They are tough, uncompromising people, but they're from really grounded backgrounds where your ethic on everything you do is built on work
yeah,
and honesty and being able to commit yourself to do something the best you can be. And as I say, I'm not saying that doesn't come out of the South or the Midlands or whatever, but I think there people offer different things. And to be the very top and stay at the very top in sport, you have to have a great work ethic, and you have to be mentally and physically tough. And they're mentally and physically very tough people. You look at them now; they're people who are still in great shape,
yeah.
and you're very clear about their philosophies and their goals and what's important to them. And I think life in the north is pretty simple, or certainly
Mm,
was pretty simple. Back in the 90s and 2000s, and they bring rugby's built on basics,
yeah.
execution of basics, and that's what they brought. That's what they brought.
I think you hit the nail on the head as well as uncompromising.
Mm.
There's a lot in the current generation. I'm going to get chased off with a stake here, but there is a lot. There's a lot of adaptability, should we probably put it, that people are not willing to. They don't feel that they have to put 100% in because something's awarded to them.
Mm.
Whereas there is the uncompromising set yourself standards, and then everyone else will either buy into it or you don't need to give them time. In my opinion, that's how I feel. Like I
I
set my own
agree.
standards and come
Yeah.
along with it, or if you don't want to buy into it, that's fine. But that's you. Uncompromising is probably the way that a lot of people get to the top, and that's the difference between certain players that have probably not fulfilled their potential as well. And there's probably coaches out there that have got every attribute to be the best at what they could be, but they potentially lack that
Yeah.
uncompromisable bit. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a
as you say, rugby league's just very hard. Do you think because there isn't the amount of stoppages, like because there's not the amount of time wasted with the
yeah.
ball out of play in league, you don't have the time to stand back and think. You've got to literally think because somebody else is going to be charging at you within about 2 seconds.
It's just a tough game. Like,
Yeah.
and rugby union is a tough game. Don't get me wrong, rugby
Yeah.
union is.
Oh, yeah,
Now,
yeah, we
you know,
know. Yeah.
the athletes in rugby union and the way it's played, the physicality now is incredible. But yeah, you think about ball in play, rugby union, you're probably talking about 45, 50%, 55% on a really good day. Rugby league, you're talking like 65, 70%, 75, 80%. Yeah, so it's physically, it's unbelievably demanding. It's rugby league, and you've got to be, as I say, incredibly tough to play it, and you've got to be incredibly skillful to play it. But more than anything, you've got to be tough. You've got to be tough, resilient, robust, and you've got to have a real good ethic, work ethic about you. And like I say, I'm trying not to categorize. I'm being really carefully not to categorise everybody in the north. I'm like, mate, we're a simple breed up here in the north, or I certainly am. Like, I know what works for me. I don't need to overcomplicate things, and that's, as I say, that's rugby, isn't it? That's rugby.
Yeah.
I mean, we try to complicate it as much as we can. You know, rugby league is a very simple sport, played by very tough people, and I think a lot of the really great players and skills gone out of rugby league, and it's more physical now than it probably ever was. But it lacks. It certainly lacks characters with skill sets that it had through the 90s and the 2000s. You know, I think you've probably got a little bit more of that in Union now. Why that is, I'm not quite sure, but you know, I think.
Do you think that's because some of those coaches have come across, those coaches that were around in the 90s?
I don't know.
And
Do you know?
and they've brought that element across to Union because they've.
I honestly don't know. Maybe it's because the conditioning part to play league has become so scientific, and the athletes are very much the same in terms of their physical capacities. So generally games are driven by different types of people, which is the beauty of rugby union. You have your big front rowers who, because they're built for purpose, and you have your second rowers who are built for purpose, and then you've got your outside backs. And you look across a lineup of an international side singing an anthem, and it looks very different. You look across the rugby league side, there's some big guys in there, but generally they're all pretty great athletes, apart from your half backs that were great athletes but smaller. So the game, it can afford to become one-dimensional almost, because it's just about winning the physical battle, but winning the battle of speed and collisions. Whereas Union's not like that. It's very technical. It has so many different facets to it. So I just think the players who used to be so exceptional, who could open defences up and do different things, they don't need to be like that anymore. Maybe it's how it's coached. So it's players don't express themselves anymore in training, and don't practice the things that they would deliver on a match day. You know, my captain at Castleford was a guy called Lee Crooks, who was he was a prop forward, one of the most skillful players you can imagine. He had he would play through the line, and there'd be an offload there every time available. And he could kick goals, and he could kick out of hand, and. I'm not sure there's many front rows are doing that at the moment in rugby league.
There's loads. It's all props are the best players around anyway. So
well, they earn the most money for the right reasons. But that's what I love about England's team at the moment. England women's team. You look at their props; they're unbelievable. Sarah Byrne, Bottomman, Maud Muir. Kelsey Clifford's just come on the scene, and really, they're so skillful and so powerful.
Somebody was saying the other day, like, if you looked back a couple of years and you saw Sarah Byrne's name on the subs bench, people would be having a heart attack. And now we've got players that are obviously of that level and above, and then you've also got Sarah Byrne that can come on and just turn a game, and it's a true testament to how that. The players have developed as well, and obviously they've got idols to aspire to, and they want to put themselves above that, which is really good. Obviously, while we're here, I think we're probably going to have to talk about that World Cup final, obviously in 2022.
Yeah.
How did obviously everyone watching probably thought it was a done deal? How did it all feel when you're in the game? Did you think it's always at jeopardy, like every game is until the whistle was blown?
Yeah, we
But
we when we went out there, the the press were like, it's a foregone conclusion, isn't it? It's yours to lose.
yeah,
I think. So well, it's not ours to lose because actually New Zealand are the champions at the moment. They've got it.
yeah,
So for a start, that's not correct. But
yeah,
we'd played the Black Ferns twice the year before. They'd just come out of COVID. We trained all the way through COVID. It was horrendous, but we trained all the way through COVID. We played them. We put 50 on them twice. Then they went to France and got 50 on them or 40 on them twice. But like you looked at that and you're thinking that's probably the worst thing that could have happened because what that instigated there. You knew for a fact that a year of being back together and they would be an outstanding side, let alone the fact that they then brought in Graham Henry and Wayne Smith and Mike Cron. They basically brought the New Zealand men's team, head coaches and coaching staff in from the World Cup. Brilliant move by them, to be honest.
yeah,
So we knew what were coming, and but every game in a World Cup is like it's everybody's World Cup. What you got to remember, it's everybody's World Cup. It's not just your World Cup. So you have to be ready, and we knew it was going to be tough, and we played Canada. I mean, to be fair, the two teams in the final probably shouldn't have been in the final. France missed a kick last minute of the game to put the Black Ferns out from in front of the sticks, basically. Canada kicked us around the field, and but for the best try I've ever seen scored on a rugby field, we probably would have been playing in the third, fourth playoff as well. But we made it into the final, so we were like, we knew it was going to be tough. But the Canada game was actually the shot in the arm that we needed to take a little bit of pressure off us in a way going into the final. But nobody could have legislated for what happened, and what we had, we over the course of a couple of years, probably 3 years, we changed our training philosophy, and we become a really tough side physically on the field. We were really well conditioned. We were very physical, very robust. We hardly had any injuries, and then we went into the World Cup, and we lost Anna Bottoman in the pool stages. She was out of the tournament. We lost Eleanor Rowland in the semi-final against Canada. Leanne Riley, there was a starting scrum half, pulled out on the morning of the game. So we suddenly had these setbacks. Now we had a good enough squad. There was no doubt that we still had a good enough squad. But then Lids picks up the red card after 17 minutes or 14 minutes, whatever it was. But then about 5 minutes later, Zoe Allgroff went off with concussion, and that was the biggest moment. That was more impactful than the sending off, because that changed our super strength, that descaled our super strength, and not just because of the line out and what she brings, but because of what she brings around the field. So we knew at that point, and then they scored immediately off the penalty, and it's 14-7, and then it's like, right, what do we leave the pack at 8, go for the jugular? Or do we take one player off and put an extra back on and try and negate their strengths, their super strength, which was unquestionably their backs? And we've been really positive-minded all the way through the tournament. I was like, right, let's just go for the jugular. Let's keep the pack together. And the thing was, the player who would have had to come off would have been Sarah Hunter. You don't take your captain off after 20 minutes of a World Cup final. It was bad enough I had to do it at half-time. But, Sarah brings so much, and especially her leadership. But when you're down to 14 and you're playing against a team who want to move the ball all over the field, you've got to get as much mobility on the field as possible. And and that wasn't Sarah's strength at that particular point. And I think she got done on the edge on one play, and that sort of convinced me. We've got to make a change at half time, but we stuck with the eight forward philosophy. And we matched them. And we took our moments, and it worked in terms of the tries we scored. We played to our strengths, we scored tries, and they played to their strengths and scored tries. And if anybody would have offered you that scenario with the last play of the game before we even kicked the ball, we would have taken it.
Yeah.
But big moment, and big pressure moment. Could there be a bigger pressure moment for any player in their life? If you're the caller or you're the thrower in particular, let alone the lifters and everybody who goes into it, that you get this right, we're world champions. You get it wrong, we're not world champions, and the whole world changes after that on what happens. And that's sport, innit? They made their play, and they went up at the front, and we probably, I think with Zoe on the field, we would have looked at different options.
Yeah.
But, hey ho.
That's as you say. That's what makes the difference probably between them this season as well. Do you think that's obviously a lot of it's playing into their setup, ready to make sure that they don't let the same thing happen on home turf?
Yeah, that's what you do, don't you? You learn, you learn and adapt. And we learned it in 2017. When we lost the World Cup in 2017, there were 2 or 3 positions we were really short and we couldn't cover.
Yeah.
So we were like, we have to grow depth in certain areas, and second row was one. We had, and people who could call the line out and stuff like that. But it's, the women's game's moving at an unbelievable pace, but it still takes X amount of time to evolve athletes, evolve callers, evolve strategic players, things like that. And they've, John Mitchell's talked about it all the way through the Six Nations. He wants effectively 2 sides. He wants to be able to play plan A, B, and C, and that's just learning from. He's obviously looked at 2022 and gone, I can clearly see what we could have done better there to negate that, or to make sure that doesn't happen again, and hopefully they do.
Do you think? Go on, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. If COVID hadn't come and you played it in 2021, do you think the result would have been different?
Yeah, I don't think we'd have even got to the final.
Really?
Yeah.
So COVID actually probably worked better for you.
It unquestionably worked better for us. Yeah.
So
again,
what do you think was missing then if you played it in 2021?
Because, and I say this with the greatest of respect, because we had, in 2021, we lost Luke Woodhouse, who was a strength and conditioner, and Richard Blaze, who was our forwards coach. Wasps came in and took him 6 months before the World Cup, if the World Cup had been played in 2021. And the Lionesses come in and took our psychologist, Kate Hayes, who's the best psychologist I've ever worked with by a mile. And so it left us short in certain areas. So we recruited another strength and conditioner who was actually a massive a guy called Alex Martin, who was brilliant. He come from Leicester Tigers, and he revolutionised how we trained. I had an idea about stuff. I think it might have been a little bit earlier than 6 months before, maybe 10 months before. And we were able to change what we did. So from that point of view, we probably benefited a little bit, but we couldn't replace Blasey like for like. There was no one available. But we took a really great coach, a guy called Mark Luffman, I played with Mark at Leeds, and he was a really tough player at Leeds, and he coached the academy at Leeds, and then he coached age grade at England, and he'd gone for the under 20s job, and he got down to the last 2 and he hadn't got it. I think Andy Tittrell got it, and we were trying to recruit, and there was just nobody available, even in the same category as Blasey. And prior to Blasey, we'd had Matt Ferguson, so I knew what level of coach I wanted, and our forwards knew what level of coach they wanted and what level of coach they needed. And Mark's a really good coach, but he'd never worked at the level those guys had worked at, and he'd been in development almost all his coaching career. And there is a huge difference between development coaching and pathway and performance coaching. And I knew it wasn't the right call, but it was probably our only call. And Mark came in and did a great job with the girls in terms of how hard he worked and what he did. But the players the players were onto it like that. And you know as a forward how important your forward coach is to you. Like that relationship is just, it's gold dust. It's the foundation of your performance as a pack and probably as individuals. And they just didn't connect. The two didn't connect and didn't align. And the pack just, like the performance really, we really sort of, and I'd say I don't want this to sound sort of negative on Mark, because he was doing a great job, but I think the mentality of the players was the biggest thing, and we slid backwards as a pack. And I was like, if we go to the World Cup on this downward trajectory, there's only going to be one outcome. We'll be lucky to get to the final, and certainly how the Canada game rolled out in the semi-final in 2022, if we'd have met that prior in 2021, we wouldn't have got past that. We would not have got past that. And which is why I say that. So when Nikki Ponsford, who was head of performance, we were training at Pennyhill Park, and she called me off the pitch right at the end of the session. Straight away, she called me off the pitch, and I was like, "Oh, something serious has happened here." Yeah. And she I want to have a chat. She said, "World Cup's been cancelled because of COVID." And I thought, thank God.
Thank
she was like, it's a disaster, this is that. And I'm thinking, nah, no, it's not. No. It's not. And and we got the players in, and the players were pretty devastated because they were mentally, they were gearing themselves up. But I think there's a few of the smarter ones who went, right, okay. And I looked at Sarah and I looked at, a couple of them, and I was like, this is all right. It's another year. It's hard. We know when we wanted to, we were looking forward to it, but they'd seen what had happened and they knew where we were. But I was like, right, now we can go through a recruitment process. We're starting to come out of COVID a little bit. Yeah. And we went through a recruitment process, and Lewis Deacon's name came up, and it was, and as soon as Deeks was in the pack, because they had a coach who'd played Premiership at the very top. I'd played with England at the very top. Was coaching, just cutting his teeth, but he was so smart and so sharp. Yeah. And then they were like, they were up again. And within 6 weeks, they were the best pack in the world by a mile again. And that's funny, isn't it? How fickle it can be. But that's why you need to get the right people in the room.
Exactly. As we said earlier, you recruit the right people around it, makes your job even easier, because they're doing the bits that you don't know. So you've got to bring the best in. So obviously, you've stepped away from the England setup. What's the next plans, or is it you sort of enjoying the commentating stuff, or have you got your eye on another role, or?
Well, I'm working with World Rugby as a performance consultant. So again, when I came out of the World Cup, or before we went into the World Cup, so my old boss Nicky Ponsford moved to World Rugby a couple of years before the World Cup, and has become she's fantastic. Nicky, a brilliant person to work for, really smart. And I spoke to her in the World Cup, and she was like, "What?" And we were just having a beer, and she was like, "What's your plan after the World Cup?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but I think they've had enough of me." Yeah. I've had enough of them, and they've had enough of me. We've had a great relationship, but it's just time to move on. So the scene was sort of set, and I'm like, "Why? What you think?" He said, "Well, look, there'll always be a big shake-up after the World Cup. There always is." And I'm like, "I'm not sure I'd go straight back into another coaching role, head coach, and I wanted to take a bit of time out." And she said, "Well, there's head coaching roles, and then there's consultant roles where we just parachute people in, and you just do it." And I'm like, "Brilliant! That is what I would love to have a crack at." And she said, "Well, look, we're talking emerging nations here. We're not talking." I'm like, "Brilliant! Let's get back to grassroots. Let's get back to the other end of the spectrum." And there was 3 or 4 teams that needed support, and one of them was Japan. And I'd met their head coach, Leslie McKenzie. And this is all the women's game. And I'd met Leslie McKenzie, their head coach, at a conference, a World Rugby conference. Really impressed with her. Really smart person, really good coach, gone well with her. She actually phoned me up and she said, "Look, I'm trying to generate some support into the program. Do you fancy it?" and I was chatting to World Rugby at the time, and so everything sort of aligned, and I went and did basically a third of a year on and off working with Japan in the first year.
Yeah.
And then off the back of that, I did a little bit with Kazakhstan, and then I did a little bit of work with Netherlands. I'd set my own business up, so I was doing some keynote stuff. I was doing some work in colleges and unis, just speaking about performance. Did a little bit of after dinner stuff, just and in between, just being at home, like. I don't want to say reconnected to my family because we're really close, but just being around a little bit more for the kids and being that support if they needed it. But they're, like I say, they're in the 20s and they're doing their own thing now. But so I was like, well, I'm enjoying this. I'm learning. I wanted a different challenge. Go to Japan. That's a different challenge.
Yeah.
Christ, I got off the plane in Tokyo in August, and I've never experienced heat like it in my life. Heat and humidity. Oh my God! And Leslie's great for taking the mickey out of you and keeping you grounded. And I had this huge, I didn't know what bag to take. I had this huge GB bag that I'd got when I was in Rio, and I had it full with gear. And I'm dragging it out. And she said, no wonder you're sweating dragging that body bag around with you everywhere you go. And anyway, so I've had 2 years doing working with a lot of teams in Asia.
Wow. Okay.
And it's been great. And then I fancied doing the punditry stuff, but I didn't think that was going to happen because I think that's maybe a particular type of commentator they're going for in the women's game, which is fine. But then I got a call from BBC, and they were like, "You fancy coming doing the Six Nations?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And I'm loving it, And you, all of a sudden you're working with Sonia McLaughlin and Gabby Logan, who were just unbelievable at their jobs, and it's a real pleasure, and loving it.
No, brilliant. Obviously, you mentioned Kazakhstan there, so they've actually recently they've had a game against Georgia, or they've got a game coming up. So Georgia have finally delved into women's rugby. Obviously, I'm a big advocate for Rugby Europe, as you have probably seen and aware that I've gone to a lot of the Spain stuff. Cover a lot of the Spain women's as well. Georgia's entry into women's rugby is potentially what a lot of people say that's why they shouldn't be allowed near the Six Nations, etc. How was Kazakhstan for a women's rugby? Because Georgia's obviously got a bit of a natural rugby talent and progression in the men's setup. Kazakhstan probably not so much, should we say?
Well, going back probably 10 years, Kazakhstan were Asian champions on a regular basis in the women's game and were playing in the World Cup. I think things have declined for one reason or another. They've declined in Kazakhstan from a women's rugby point of view. I think also Japan have accelerated massively under Leslie. They are a good side. Who play Spain in the World Cup? They're in Spain's pool. Hong Kong are moving at a rapid rate enough. Both programs have drawbacks in terms of literally the players, the pool of players, the size of players. So there's got to be specific things that you have to really focus on in those programs around athleticism, around technical excellence, things like that. But anyway, I digress a little bit. But when I went to the first gig I did with Japan was the Asian Championships in Kazakhstan, which was a fantastic place. What a great experience going to Kazakhstan. Yeah. Now, Kazakhstan were very physical, but they got beat very heavily by Japan. And they got beat by Hong Kong in a close game. And then the year after, when I did work with Kazakhstan, I met them in Hong Kong for the Asian Championships, and they were just so under-resourced. They got a pool of players, but they had like 4 members of staff. And they were doing their very best, but the guy who's the forwards coach is also the strength and conditioner, and he's doing the physio piece, and he's helping manage the team, and so I'm a little bit like I'm not sure where they've gone from there, but they've definitely, from where they were there, they've definitely fallen away, and whether they can come back or not remains to be seen.
Yes, obviously Georgia have got a game against them, or they've got one, they've played one, or they're about to play. They've got a back-to-back game against them. So
okay, that'll be interesting.
Yeah. So Georgia delving into women's rugby. alongside obviously the likes of Spain, Portugal, there there's obviously massive noise around Georgia within Rugby Europe, obviously winning it 8 times on the bounce and stuff like that in the men's scene, and obviously getting into the Six Nations that people keep talking about. But as we know, that's not going to happen. Do you think a Six Nations with a likes of Spain and Portugal to start with, an extended women's version, do you think that will help develop the game within rugby? Because Spain have won again another Rugby Europe Championships.
Hmm.
Obviously, you've got Holland, the Netherlands have just done really
Hmm.
well as well. They've just finished
Yeah.
second. They've just put 93 points on Sweden at the weekend, I think.
All right.
So there's two, potentially three teams that are clearly standing out
Yeah.
within the
Yeah.
Rugby Europe stuff. Do you think that women's Six Nations is probably going to be the one that's more adaptable than the men's to to
Yeah.
to accept more?
I think it would have to be. I think the men's Six Nations, the tradition and everything that goes with it. If you think how long it took to get Italy into it, it's what it is very well protected. I think in terms of
Yeah,
the tradition of it and the dynamic of it. The women's is different in terms of you still have that same feel to it in terms of the nations, but one of the things they're striving to overcome or find a solution to is the dominance of England, and that's the biggest challenge for the Six
yeah,
Nations. I think do other teams come in underneath? I think there should always be possibility of looking at that. But what you've got in the Women's Six Nations now is you've got Wales full time, Ireland full
yeah,
time, Scotland
yeah,
full time, Italy. Obviously, they've just changed their staff, and I'm not quite sure what their structure's like. But you've got teams who are evolving,
yeah,
and they need to evolve. So the games, I'm a little bit surprised by some of the scores in some of the games. I think this weekend that's just not the weekend that's just gone, the one before. So Italy beat Scotland. Nobody saw that coming, but that's
yeah,
actually great for the competition. That
yeah,
suggests that if you have a bad day, you're going to get beat
yeah,
because sides are competent. So you look at that, but then you look at how Ireland put Wales away by 40 odd points, nearly 50 points, and you're thinking that's not great. But 2 years ago, Wales were like right up there, and now they've got Sean Lynn in, who will unquestionably do a great job with them, and
yeah,
there'll be a resurgence in Wales. So I think there's still a lot to play out in the women's
yeah,
Six Nations in terms of the teams that sit underneath England. And like France tend to be getting closer to the others rather than close to England. We might find out differently this weekend, but I very much doubt
yeah,
it. France on 70 minutes, France is like 2 points in front of Italy and losing to Italy at half time this weekend, just gone. And that sort of
yeah,
shows, I think, where France are at the moment, as well as probably how Italy have gone this week. So I think before they look at bringing other teams in, they need to let this play out and see how competitive it's going to be. Because I think next year it'll be super competitive below England. The biggest problem they've got is it's a foregone conclusion
yeah,
before a ball's kicked, and that's not England's fault. England are setting the pace, and how they find a solution to that, I don't know. There's a few
How long
being
do you,
thrown in.
how long do you think that continues? How long do you think England's dominance
No,
continues before one of
however
these other
long
teams?
it depends on how much the other teams put into it. Depends whether they take the same approach England took, which was to surround the players with the best coaches, the best staff they can, to give them the best resources they can give them, to build a league that supports it, and to really start developing a pathway that underpins everything. So, but that's not to say England have been just giving everything they asked for. They haven't. This has
No.
been an evolution process over a 10-year period that has been well constructed. It's battled real challenges. So as I say, the strides we made through COVID when everybody else parked up,
Yeah,
but that took an unbelievable amount of effort to make that work. an unbelievable amount of resource to make it work, and an unbelievable amount of commitment from people. But what we did in COVID is now being reflected as part of what's happening with this England side. Why they're getting so much further away, because they continue to develop, and you see players coming through. Like, they kept the league running as much as they kept the international scene going, and like, it used to, the pecking order used to be England pathway, England under 20s, England seniors, and there was a national academy in the middle that sort of picked up players who weren't quite ready, or players that surfaced in the league. Now it is categorically pathway, under 20s, PWR, which is an absolute breeding ground for young players, which is doing exactly what Nicky Ponsford set it up to do, which is produce the players for England, and then your senior team. And you've just got this conveyor belt of players who are just starting to, and it's just starting. It's just starting. It's not even anywhere near the potential that it could be. So, I think that the biggest threat to England is the overall state of the game, not anybody in any opposition they're going to play.
So, I know obviously there's probably not enough teams for these other countries to create their own league. Do you think sort of a women's URC would potentially work best for them to be able to develop and create that breeding ground like you've just sort of stated about the PWR?
Well, they've got like they've got
the Celtic leagues and stuff.
They've got the
like
Celtic leagues, yeah.
They've got Energy leagues or something in Ireland. So they've got that, but you've got to have the top level, haven't you? You've got to be able to play at the top level to create top level players.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's ideas get kicked around. Do they put a Welsh team into the PWR? Do they put a Scottish team into the PWR? Or do they really put an emphasis on developing the Celtic leagues? So I think there's a few things that they're kicking around at the moment. The key bit is people are very much aware of it, and there's a lot of thought process going into it. How, obviously, because of the overall pool of players for each nation is not massive. So how do you develop your player pathway? How do you develop players from within? If they're spreading off everywhere and they go into the PWR, so maybe need to look at the PWR and go, okay, listen, so it's like 5 international players, or like say expand it, or bring a league in underneath it. That has the years like the senior the A team league as such. But I think that they're kicking a lot of ideas around now that look at the moment. But ultimately, the engagement and pathway stuff is going to be critical to every nation, because unless you're generating players to play, and unless you're developing those players in the right way, both physically, mentally, tactically, technically, then you're not going to have the quality of players who you want to bring into the league. So it's going to be a slow process. Whatever way they go about it, it's going to be a slow process. No one's going to overtake England within the next 5 years. I can't see it, but they can close the gap if they get the sort of ducks aligned.
And it's the commercialisation piece in it. This all costs money. It's not. It can't be done. It can't be done for free. And what Ireland obviously managed to do, where they've managed to get the centralised contract, Wales have done that. They must have taken lessons. Were you around when England gave the contracts out and then had to take them back? Was that under your sort of periods?
Yeah. Contracts,
Because obviously you had the centralised contracts, then they got withdrawn and then they got reissued and stuff.
Were they withdrawn? I don't remember them being withdrawn. I think that the process was that when I first came in, the players would be contracted on a camp by camp and tournament by tournament basis, and then they introduced X amount of contracts. It was probably about 20. At this point, the sevens were all contracted full time, but they brought 15's contracts in, and then as they increased, and what they did is they tiered the contracts. So there would be an A, B, and a C contract. Now I think there's still that sort of format, but there's more of them. I don't know I don't recall them ever being withdrawn.
No, I thought maybe it was how it was reported that there was, as you said, with the tiers or something like that. It was reported that England contracts were awarded and then they were sort of withdrawn. Maybe it was at certain levels. Maybe it was how I read it previously. But there's a lot of obviously Ireland have managed to free up the funds to be able to centrally contract 32 players, which is quite a big statement
Yeah.
for a team like Ireland that have struggled. Should we probably fairly say within the women's game?
They've had a lot of challenges, haven't they? You know, off the field and on the field.
Exactly, and I think it's a true statement of how the game's moving forward as well within women's rugby, that even countries like Ireland have now got to sit up and say, actually, we've got to make this a proper centralised contract role. Otherwise, you're not going to get that development path for players.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think what you're seeing with Ireland is, you know, and I don't want to delve into the politics of the Irish women's game, but what was, or certainly from the outside appeared clear, was that at one point they put a huge emphasis on their sevens program, and actually they got really good returns on it.
Yeah.
You know, but it was very much of the detriment to the 15s. Now they've looked, and you know, I'm not sure what the sevens say. It looks like the sevens is probably paying a little bit of a price for readdressing the balance, but the 15s model, you know, if they've firmly pinned their colours to the 15s mast like England did, then you can see that in the contracts that they've awarded, the staff they've recruited, you know, and as I say, 4 years ago, Wales did it, and under Johan Cunningham they had 2 third-place finishes. You know, they slipped back, and all the stuff that came out of the WRU off the back of it, you know, has been well documented, and so they're in this transitional stage, a little bit like Ireland did, but they can do it from within a full-time program, which is really important because they can move it more quickly. And as I say, now Sean Lynn's in there. But what Ireland have done is they've really built themselves what looks like a really solid program with a really strong 15s group, but that's also supplemented or supported by some of their sevens players who've been around a professional environment, full-time environment for a while, have seen some success in the World Series and such, and so you've got some real cutting edge players that are giving some really good quality support to Ireland. So they look like they've got a really good mix, you know. And then you've got players like Aoife Waithe coming through, and Dorothy Wall, and players like that. Where, you know, they look fantastic. And what you get is what you saw at the weekend, which is they put 50 points on Wales, and you know they've got England, you know, at 7-5 at half time the week before. So you get what you put in. You get out what you put in.
And that's it. And I think that's a true testament of how the women's game's going to progress. Is those players are also able to play in the PWR. They're playing in their own leagues, and that will grow and develop as well. It's going to be a really exciting next few years.
Yeah, for sure.
One last one before we sort of say bye, because obviously I've kept you for a little while here now.
My pleasure.
Your opinion for the 2025 World Cup? Who's going to win it?
I desperately want to say England. I do think England will win it. But if they didn't, it wouldn't surprise me, simply because the Black Ferns they'll show up. They know how to do a cycle. They know how to be ready for a World Cup. And Canada, if Canada continue to develop between now and the World Cup, because they should, in WXV, they should have beat England. They were the better side than England in that final game by a long way. But England are great at throwing big punches at the right time, and they did it right at the end. But Canada could have been 20 points up on England after 20 minutes, and Canada can match England for physicality. Their forwards are big, strong, and they keep going. They're great athletes. If they can add a little bit of finesse and a little bit of execution to their backline, then they always show up at the big tournaments to Canada. So you could see it'd be any one of three. If I had to pick one, I'd pick England because they just look unstoppable at this moment in time. And that you talked about earlier about bringing players like Sarah Byrne off the bench, their bench can have such an impact that I don't think any other team can even get close to that. And that could be the defining factor. What the finishers bring when they come off the bench.
I think that's a similar luxury to what Eddie Jones had when he sort of inherited England as well. There was the finishers that were able to sort of take the team to that next level, and that strength of depth is a testament to how England have developed. But Simon, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate. Obviously, you've jumped on Easter Monday to get this recorded.
No, absolute pleasure, mate. Absolute pleasure. It got me out of going shopping.
Perfect, even better. There's a double-edged sword. So, obviously, for everyone that wants to hear more, obviously from the likes of Simon, everyone else that we're able to try and get on in the future. Next week we've got Rugby Roots on. We're going back to old school grassroots rugby, talking about the RFU's attempt to confuse everyone up until the last minute on who was getting promoted, who wasn't getting relegated, etc., etc. So next week we've got Rugby Roots on. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, comment on every sort of platform we've got, and obviously share the love in the comments for what Simon's done for his Easter Monday of getting out shopping and coming to chat with us. So thank you for everyone that's joined us. Thank you. Goodbye.